I'm Megan Bruce. I'm the president of ACU for Life, and I'm really glad you guys are all here. This is a topic that affects us all in one way or another, and I'm glad we have time to sit down and think about it and express all of our thoughts and hear each other out. A few housekeeping things. The lecture portion of this event is 4 to 5. It will be recorded, audio and video, and will be published on our website. The Q&A portion of this event is 5 to 6, and it will not be video recorded, it will not be published on our website, but it will be audio recorded just for staff purposes. And also just of our speaker for today, so no one's questions will be recorded. If you need to leave early, that is totally fine. If you have friends that need to come late, absolutely, whatever you gotta do. We would just ask that if you get chapel credit, you have been here for at least an hour out of respect for the chapel office. So, appreciate that. Without further ado, let me introduce our guest speaker. Emily Geiger is the Director of Education and Outreach at the Equal Rights Institute, or ERI. She is the former co-president of Owls for Life at St. Olaf College. At ERI, she's using her educational background to write, to develop curriculum, and teach pro-life advocates how to change minds, save lives, and build a culture of life on their campuses. A sought-after speaker, Emily frequently presents lectures and appears in media interviews, including MSNBC, BBC Newsday, and Focus on the Family. Emily is also on the board of directors for Cradle of Hope, an organization that provides financial and material assistance to families and pregnant women. Please welcome Emily Geiger.
Thank you, Megan. I am really young, in case you didn't already notice that fact. I am fresh out of college, and so that means that I get asked the question a lot. What are you doing with your life? Like, I'm getting my hair cut. Literally, this happened yesterday. The lady cutting my hair was like, what do you do for a living? And I spent months hating that question because I talk about abortion all day, every day. So how on earth am I supposed to answer the question, what do you do for a living, in a way that's going to start this conversation off okay? Here's what I finally settled on. If somebody says to me, hey, Emily, what do you do for a living? I say, well, I help pro-life people to be less weird. And every time they do exactly what you just did. They look at me with this slightly sideways face, and they kind of chuckle to themselves, and they're like, what does that mean? And I say, well, I help pro-life people to make more good arguments and fewer, frankly, bad ones. And I try to help us connect relationally with people who think differently from us so we can actually engage with other people's ideas. It's a really strange job. I recognize that. But I think it's so important in our society today because in case y'all haven't noticed, we are incredibly bad at actually talking to people who think differently from us. Like, it has been quite frankly depressing to me to watch how polarized our society has become. Like, abortion has always been a difficult topic to talk about. It's emotionally complicated. It's also very ethically and philosophically complicated, which we'll talk a lot about today. But these days, it feels to me like we can't have a conversation about anything. It is so sad to me. And I'm really aware that I don't really think there's any good examples, like in the media, of adults who can disagree with each other respectfully and productively. Like, they usually just end up screaming at each other, either literally or in all caps on the internet, and they attack each other's character rather than the actual ideas that are coming out of their mouths. I think this is a major problem on every side of politics these days, and I want to see this conversation get better. But if I'm being perfectly honest with you, I get particularly peeved anytime I see someone on the conservative side of politics engaging in that really horrible behavior. Like, I'm sorry, I might offend some of you right now. It's probably inevitable. But Ben Shapiro destroys idiot liberal. Like, come on. It is basically a meme at this point. You will never see Equal Rights Institute release an Emily Geiger destroys video. It is not going to happen. Because I don't think that it's helpful to listen to people who make you think the other side is dumb or bad or the enemy. And there's a lot of people that we take in who do that. I am not afraid of naming names. I already said Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Sean Hannity, Candace Owens. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm focusing on conservatives right now, but liberals do this all the time too. Just turn on MSNBC. I have been on MSNBC. Okay, but the problem is, we like to watch that stuff. We like to watch our favorite commentator, whoever that is, take on a group of people from the other side and absolutely demolish them because there's some part of us that gets joy from watching them look stupid. And I think that is really bad for us. I will actually go so far as to say I think that is hurting our souls. I do not think that you should be listening to people who make you think the other side is dumb or bad or the enemy. Because it's a lot more complicated than that, folks. When I'm talking to a pro-choice person, I'm very pro-life. I work for a national pro-life organization. But when I'm talking to a pro-choice person, I do not think that she is dumb. Really genuinely, I do not think that. I think that pro-choice people have a lot of really good reasons that they came to their position. I think they've thought this through really seriously. I think there is always a lot of compassion for women involved in why they have that position. I do not think pro-choice people are dumb. And I certainly do not think that they are my enemy. And if I did, that would do us literally zero good in solving absolutely any of the controversial issues in our society. I think we need less hate and more actual dialogue in our society. And I'm trying to encourage that in the pro-life movement. I think we need more dialogue among friends and less debate among strangers on Twitter. So if you're pro-choice, or maybe you're not really sure what you think about abortion, but you don't think you completely agree with me that abortion should be illegal, no matter where you're at, I'm so glad you're here. I want you to know that I am not expecting anyone to change their mind about abortion today because of this. Okay, people don't do that. People do not change their minds about very serious issues because of one presentation by some person they've never seen before. It just doesn't happen, okay? I know that. I am hoping that this is better and more interesting than you probably thought it was going to be. And I want you to know that I'm inherently impressed by you because it is very hard to come listen to someone you know you disagree with talk. If you're pro-life and you're in this room right now, you get no brownie points. This is so easy for you. I think the pro-life people in the room need to be more like the pro-choice or undecided people in the room and actually go out of your way to listen to people that you know you disagree with. Because I think pro-life people don't do that enough. I think pro-life people don't actually talk to people who disagree with them, and therefore I think pro-life people wildly misunderstand the people who disagree with them. As a matter of fact, I think there is actually a catastrophe happening in the pro-life movement that most pro-life people do not understand what pro-choice people mean by the single most common type of pro-choice argument that exists. I think most pro-life people radically misunderstand what pro-choice people mean when they talk about bodily autonomy arguments. A couple of years ago, I was doing a speech much like this one, just not on this topic. And this very sweet elderly lady came up to me afterwards. And she said, "Hey, Emily, could you give me a smart pro-choice argument?" And I said, "Sure. Yeah, I can give you a smart pro-choice argument, no problem." So I put on my pro-choice Emily hat, and I said to her, "Well, I just think that women should have the right to do what they want with their own bodies." And she said, "Oh, well, that's easy. I mean, I agree with you. Women should have the right to do what they want with their own bodies. But see, the unborn baby's body is not your body. It's its own body with its own DNA." And I said, "Yeah, I know that. That's not really what I'm saying. I'm saying that pregnancy involves a woman's body very intimately. And I don't think that women should be forced to donate their bodies to this other thing that's basically trying to feed off of them." And she said, "That is a horrible way to think about the unborn. Oh my gosh, you think they're like parasites? They're not, they're human. And how dependent you are on someone else doesn't make you less human. I mean, infants are dependent on their mothers to survive, right? And you don't think that it's okay to kill infants?" And I said, "No, that is not what I'm saying." I don't think you're actually listening to me. I am saying that the unborn are human. I think that's completely irrelevant. We don't force people to donate their bodies to other people. Like, if I was dying of kidney failure, I don't think the government should force you to donate your kidney to me. And if you agree with that, if you agree with me that the government cannot force you to donate your kidney to me, then why are you trying to force women to donate their bodies during pregnancy? She just stood there. She had absolutely no reply to that. At which point I put back on my pro-life Emily hat and I explained to her what bodily autonomy arguments are and how to actually respond to them. Here's what I find fascinating about that little story. I did not intend to get upset with her. She was this very nice elderly lady, and she asked a perfectly legitimate question. Can you give me a smart pro-choice argument? And then I went into role play mode, which is something I do a lot when I'm talking to pro-life people. I have talked to thousands upon thousands of pro-choice people. I talk to pro-choice people on college campuses pretty much for a living. And as a result, I have a pretty darn good understanding of pro-choice arguments. And I care a lot about representing pro-choice people well and what they actually think. And so when I role play as a pro-choice person, when I'm talking to pro-life people, I care a lot about representing their arguments well. And in this case, I knew I was making a smart pro-choice argument. And she kept insisting I was saying something stupid. And I knew that I wasn't. That situation made me so aware that I never ever want to make a pro-choice person feel like that. Because here's what usually happens in conversations about abortion. I've watched this exact thing happen in countless conversations I've observed, okay? The pro-choice person says one of these key phrases. They say it's part of her body, it's inside her body, it's dependent on her body. My body, my choice. Women should have bodily autonomy. A fetus is like a parasite using the woman's resources. The government shouldn't control women's bodies. Basically, the pro-choice person says the word body. And then the pro-life person strawmans them. Strawmanning is when you intentionally misrepresent a proposition that is set up because it's easier to defeat than someone's actual argument. In other words, strawmanning someone is responding to the stupidest possible version of what they said rather than what they actually said. Now, the technical definition of strawmanning is that it is intentional, and I think that sometimes it is. Like, if you watch two politicians in a debate with each other, they are usually intentionally strawmanning each other. They are intentionally, like, trying to make the other person sound stupid so they don't have to respond to, like, the smart thing that the other politician is arguing for. They're just trying to make them look stupid, okay? That is intentional strawmanning. But I think most of the time when just, like, average pro-life and pro-choice people talk to each other, I don't think the strawmanning is intentional. I think pro-life people genuinely think that they understand pro-choice people. The problem is they really, really do not. Ultimately, regardless of whether the strawmanning is intentional or unintentional, it is still just as frustrating. If you were the person being strawmanned, I am so sorry. So if you're pro-choice and you've ever felt this way, you've ever felt strawmanned by a pro-lifer, I'm really sorry that happened, and I want you to know I'm trying to fix it so that pro-life people don't keep doing that. This is why every single time that I hear a pro-choice person say one of those key phrases, say the word body, the very first thing I always do is I ask them a clarification question. I say, I want to understand your view, but it sounds like you might mean one of two different things. Do you mean that the fetus is not a human being because it's like a functional part of the woman's body, like her kidney or something? It's literally part of her body. Or do you mean that it doesn't matter if the unborn are human, because women should have the right to do what they want with their bodies? I've asked this question in thousands of conversations about abortion. You want to know what percentage of people answered the former? That they thought that the fetus was literally part of the woman's body. Like 2. I don't even mean percent. I literally mean 2. No one thinks this. Pro-choice people are making a far more interesting claim that it doesn't actually matter what the unborn is because it's inside the woman's body. And when something is inside your body, the rules change. And the biology of what happens in pregnancy is really not that interesting, which is why all of the smart pro-choice people of the world, the smart pro-choice philosophers, do not argue about the biology of the unborn. We're going to spend like 2 seconds on it just so we're all on the same page. And it's helpful if you're pro-life to know how I explain it, if I am talking to like one of those 2 people. But this is not where the interesting stuff is. So we're not going to spend very long on this. And we're going to spend the whole rest of the time on the far more interesting and smart pro-choice claim. So basically, there's 3 biological things that you should know about the unborn. Okay, the unborn is living, it is human, and it is a whole organism. Let's just break those down one at a time. So we know the unborn are alive because they have the characteristics of living things. Namely, they are growing through cellular reproduction, they are metabolizing food into energy, and they are reacting to stimuli. Now, there is debate amongst biologists if there is an entity that does only 2 out of the 3 things. Only 2 out of the 3 of growing through cellular reproduction, metabolizing food into energy, and reacting to stimuli. There is legit debate about whether or not that thing is actually alive. As soon as it does the 3rd thing, the debate is over. It is biologically alive. That does not necessarily mean this entity has any value. Like grass is alive, okay? Literally just means it is alive. Cool. The unborn are human because living things reproduce after their own kind only. We all know this. 2 cows do not get together and have a duck. It's just not how that works. We also know that the unborn have uniquely human DNA. This is something that pro-life people love to bring up, literally all of the time. I don't think it is that helpful most of the time that pro-life people bring it up, because again, most pro-choice people not actually confused about the biology of the unborn. But if I am talking to a pro-choice person who maybe is a little bit unsure about what's happening in pregnancy, that's okay. This is a true fact. You can bring it up. Just please be sure the person you're talking to is actually a little confused about the biology of the unborn, which is fine, no judgment. But like, this isn't that helpful most of the time pro-life people bring it up. Last one, the unborn are whole organisms because if I'm talking to a pro-choice person who is maybe a little unsure about what's happening in pregnancy, this is usually where the confusion lies. Because they might say to me something like, I totally get that the unborn is alive and it has human DNA, but so does a sperm cell or a skin cell. Those are alive, they have human DNA. You don't think that sperm cells are like sacred or something? I think this is a perfectly legitimate question. Because let's be honest, a day 1 zygote does not look all that different from a sperm cell. So I totally understand why this would be weird for some people. The problem is there's a confusion happening between parts and wholes. The unborn is not merely part of a body like a skin cell or a sperm cell is. Like, my skin cell is part of the organism that is me. It is working towards the good of the rest of me. The unborn is its own organism because it has its own parts that are working towards the good of it. This is not like what I think. This is just how biologists classify things. I do not make this up. This is what the definition of an organism is. I think sometimes the reason maybe some people get confused about this is because I think they're thinking about human development kind of like a construction project, like building a car. Let's imagine for a second that you work at a car factory. You and a bunch of your friends go out after work for a beer, and you have this super philosophical conversation about when the thing that you are building is actually a car. I totally know people that would have this debate for hours on end because they have way too much time on their hands, honestly. We can imagine that there's multiple sides to this debate. Maybe there's one person who's like, we have a car when the wheels go on, because like the whole point of a car is that it can move somewhere, right? So when the wheels go on, there you go, it's a car. Somebody else says, no. It's when the engine goes into the car, because the engine's like the heart and soul of a car. So when the engine goes in, then you have a car. Third person is like, guys, come on. It is a car when you can actually turn the key in the ignition and you can drive it off the assembly line. Now it is a car. I guarantee you right now that there is no one in this little debate of ours who is claiming we have a car when the very first 2 pieces of steel are welded together. Like, that is not a car. That is 2 pieces of steel welded together. And that is how I think pro-choice people sometimes see pro-life people. I think they're like, I could have sympathy for someone who says halfway through pregnancy, it's a human, but like, really, guys, you are picking the first possible moment I get why that seems weird, right? The problem is the unborn are not actually constructed like cars. They develop themselves from within. This is a really weird concept to explain because there's not much out here in our world that develops the way the unborn does. The best analogy I have is a Polaroid picture. Like if you've ever messed around with a Polaroid camera, you know that when you press the shutter, at that exact instant, the image exists. You just can't see it yet. All it needs are adequate nutrients in the proper environment, and it literally grows itself to maturity. That's very similar to the unborn because nothing is actually added to the unborn from the time of fertilization except for adequate nutrients in the proper environment, which, spoiler alert, are the exact same two things that you and I still need now to keep growing to maturity. I am 24 years old. I am not considered biologically mature. What I still need is adequate nutrients in the proper environment, and my body continues to grow itself to maturity. And so if I'm an organism now, and nothing has been added to me except for the exact same adequate nutrients in the proper environment all the way back to the beginning, then I must have been that same organism then, because there's been nothing else added to me. That's the biology stuff in a nutshell. The unborn is living, it is human, and it is whole. Again, there are no famous pro-choice philosophers, no famous pro-choice thinkers that take any issue with any of this. They all agree the unborn is biologically human, like it is a member of the species Homo sapiens. They're making a far more interesting claim that that actually isn't relevant because it's inside the woman's body. And when things are inside your body, the rules change. You have a right to make choices about what happens to things inside your body, or what kinds of things you donate your body to. Now, there are two kinds of bodily autonomy arguments, and we'll break them down one at a time. The sovereign zone position and the right to refuse position. You've probably never heard them described like that before because these are terms that philosophers, both pro-life and pro-choice, use to describe the positions. But you've definitely heard these positions described before in real life, and maybe you have this position or you know someone who does. So the sovereign zone position is the idea that you have the right to do anything you want with anything inside your body. In other words, my body is my sovereign zone. Think of it in a country jurisdiction kind of way. Like I am the queen of this universe right here. This is my sovereign zone. I have the right to do anything I want with anything inside my body because this is my zone and I get to make choices about what happens inside of it. You have the right to do anything you want with anything inside your body. That is a very strong claim, which is actually why it is the weaker of the two arguments. Like if it was my job to advise pro-choice people how to make better arguments for abortion, this is not the route that I would tell them to go. I would tell them to make the second kind of bodily autonomy argument that we'll go talk about in a little bit. This is not the argument that all the smart pro-choice philosophers are using. They're using the second one. But I still hear this one among average pro-choice people a ton. In other words, this is what the slogan, "My body, my choice," actually means. This is my body. I have the right to make choices about anything that happens in my body. Very popular, but not the argument that smart pro-choice people are making, like the philosophers of the world, because it claims way too much. Like, what would the world actually look like if this was true? If it is true that you have the right to do anything you want with anything inside your body, and then first of all, that means that there can be no restrictions on abortion at all. And this is a view that we know statistically vast majority of pro-choice people already don't agree with. There was a 2019 PBS NewsHour Marist poll that was specifically trying to understand what pro-choice people think about abortion. And in that poll, they discovered that 72% of self-identified pro-choice people think that there should be restrictions on when abortion is allowed during pregnancy. Like some people put the cutoff at 3 months, some people put it at 6 months, some people put it at 8 months, some people put it at viability, some people put it at only when the woman's life is at risk. People put the line all over the place, and I don't really care where they put the line for the purposes of this. What I care about is the fact that they have a line. The vast majority, 72% of pro-choice people, think that abortion should not be available for all 9 months of pregnancy. But here's the problem, right? If the sovereign zone view is true, if you have the right to do anything you want with anything inside your body, you can't believe both those things at the same time. You can't say, I am for abortion because you have the right to do anything you want with anything inside your body, but also at a certain point, you don't have a right to do anything you want with anything inside your body. That doesn't work. You can't have that position at the same time, which is, again, why most smart pro-choice people use the different argument. This also means that we can't have any restrictions on reasons that people get an abortion. I talk to thousands upon thousands of pro-choice people every year, and I have never talked to a pro-choice person who is comfortable with the idea of sex selection abortion. Like the idea that it should be legal for a couple to decide, because they found out that this fetus is female, we're going to deliberately kill females because we think females are less valuable than males. I've never met anyone who wasn't horrified by that idea. I am horrified by that idea, that we still live in a world where there are people who think females are less valuable than males and would deliberately kill a female just because it's female. Yikes. But if the sovereign zone view is true, that would have to be legal. I can take this idea further, though, which requires me to talk about thalidomide. Thalidomide is a really tragic part of medical history. So back in the 1950s, thalidomide was a medicine that was used to treat morning sickness or nausea during pregnancy. And thalidomide was really, really effective at treating morning sickness, but they found out too late that it was actually causing very severe birth defects. So it's causing babies to be born without arms and legs, or with very, very severely deformed arms and legs. This is a real thing that happened to about 10,000 babies that were born between about 1955 and 1960 across the US, Canada, and Western Europe. When we get into this thought experiment philosophy land, it can be really easy to accidentally dehumanize the very real people that we're talking about here. And so out of respect to the fact this is a very real thing, I am going to put an image up on the screen of a baby who was born after his mother took thalidomide. It'll be on the screen for 5 seconds, and I will let you know when the image is gone. So if you don't want to see it, you should look away now. It's gone. So after about 5 years of this happening, the medical community finally figured out what was going on, and they pulled thalidomide from the shelves. And you saw why. We needed to make sure that that was not going to continue happening. However, you still actually can get thalidomide today. It is used to treat several things. But the FDA has the craziest regulations around it that I have ever seen. I actually read through them once. In order to be given thalidomide in this country, you have to provide weekly negative pregnancy tests to your doctor. And you have to prove to them that you are using 2 simultaneous forms of birth control. If you stop proving any of those things, or one of those pregnancy tests comes back positive, or you stop providing them, you are instantly pulled off of thalidomide. And for good reason. You saw why we have to have those crazy regulations. But here's the problem, right? If the sovereign zone view is true, if you have the right to do anything you want with anything inside your body, then we have to get rid of those FDA regulations around thalidomide. We would have to make it perfectly legal, no regulations, for a pregnant woman to take thalidomide if she wanted to, because she has the right to do anything she wants with anything inside her body, subject to no restrictions whatsoever. I've never talked to someone who thought we should take away the FDA regulations around thalidomide. No one actually thinks you have a right to do anything you want with anything inside your body. I can take this idea a little further even though. What if there was a woman who was pregnant and she went to her doctor and she said, I want you to give me thalidomide, but not because I have morning sickness. I want you to give me thalidomide so that I can intentionally deform my child. We cannot say that's wrong. Don't get me wrong, I am not saying that this is what women are like or that anyone would actually do this. I don't think anyone actually would. But we're in philosophy land right now. So if you can imagine it, it goes. And we could imagine someone like this. I don't know why someone would do this. Like, maybe they think they're going to get a tax break. Maybe they already have a child with a disability and now they don't want to have like a perfect child after that. This is a messed up person. This is not okay. I am not saying this is what women are like or that anyone would actually do this. But if the sovereign zone view is true, we cannot say this is wrong. That should be reason alone to reject the sovereign zone position. Like, ultimately, if the sovereign zone view is true, if you can do anything you want with anything inside your body, then you can do literally anything to an unborn child, including having it tortured to death. Like, again, I'm not saying this is what women are like or that anyone would actually do this, but like, hypothetically, someone could hire a doctor to go in there with medical instruments daily for all 9 months of pregnancy, long after we know for sure that the fetus can feel pain. I mean, the most pro-choice doctors in the world think that fetal pain begins at about 24 weeks of pregnancy. There's a lot of science that suggests that that is very incorrect and fetal pain begins much earlier than that, but let's assume the pro-choice scientists are right for the sake of argument and it's 24 weeks. That still leaves 16 weeks where we know for sure that fetus can feel pain, going in there daily with medical instruments, torturing it until the doctor finally kills it moments before delivery. We wouldn't do that to any insect. Like, no one thinks that's okay. The sovereign zone view breaks down because it claims way too much that no one actually agrees with, which is why all the smart pro-choice philosophers of the world are using the other kind of bodily rights argument, the right to refuse position. The right to refuse position is the idea that you don't have the right to do anything you want with anything inside your body. Okay, that is way too extreme. But you do minimally have the right to refuse the use of your body by someone else who is trying to use it. In other words, women cannot be forced to donate their bodies to support someone else. This argument was first made famous back in the 1980s by a pro-choice philosopher by the name of Judith Jarvis Thomson. She wrote a paper called A Defense of Abortion. And in that paper, there's a very particular section of it called The Violinist. I have no idea why. No one cares about the rest of her paper. Like, no one ever seems to read it. There's some interesting stuff in there. You should read the whole paper, guys. But just this one section, The Violinist, has become wildly popular in about the last 10 years. And it's widely being read in Philosophy 101 classes, like all over the country. So when I go to a college campus, I hear a lot of pro-choice people recite me The Violinist, because it's a pretty good argument. So I bet some of you in this room have heard of The Violinist before. If you haven't, it's totally fine. I'll explain what it is. You're good. You're not like behind or anything. But I bet some of you have heard of it. So I just want to recognize that fact. The Violinist is a hypothetical story, and it goes like this. Imagine that you wake up tomorrow in a hospital bed, and you have no idea how you got there. A little bit scary, right? You look around the room, and you notice that there is this mysterious man lying in a second hospital bed next to you. And there is a tube that is coming out of his side and going into your side. This is getting weirder. You're a little freaked out. Suddenly, doctor comes running into the room and is like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Let me explain to you what happened. You were kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers. And this man in the bed next to you is a world-famous violinist. That's why this is called The Violinist. Okay? Man in the bed next to you is a world-famous violinist. He is dying of a very rare kidney disease that requires him to be hooked up to someone else's kidney for 9 months. You see where this is going now, don't you? All right, so somehow the Society of Music Lovers figured out that you, of all people, were a perfect match for the violinist. And so they kidnapped you, and they brought you here, and they hooked you up to him. And all of that is horribly unjust. I am so sorry. But here is the problem. Now you're kind of stuck. Because the violinist is a person who has an equal right to life. And if you unplug from the violinist, he will die. Judith Jarvis Thompson invites us all to agree that you have the legal right to unplug from the violinist. Maybe you're a bad person if you unplug from the violinist, but you shouldn't be legally required. The government cannot come in and chain you to the bed and force you to stay plugged in to the violinist for the next 9 months. And therefore, says Thompson, you have the right to have an abortion because you have the right to unplug from this other person who is trying to use your body. If you are pro-life and you've never heard that argument before, I want you to just take a second and think about how smart that is. Pro-choice people do not make dumb arguments, guys. That is a really good argument. And here's why. It accepts the entire pro-life case. It says, even if y'all are right that this unborn fetus thing is a human person who has the exact same rights as you and I, it should be treated equally under the law, even if y'all are right about that, you still have the right to have an abortion. Because you have the right to unplug from people trying to use your body. In this story, the unborn is being made equal or analogous to a full-grown adult male. And they're even if y'all are right and the unborn is equal to full-grown adult men, we still have the right to have an abortion. The first time I ever heard this argument, I was a freshman in college, and I was completely stumped. I was I got nothing. I pride myself on being open-minded, and if I genuinely hear an argument for a position I don't have, that I think is really good, I need to take time to think about it. And I think I have an obligation to change my mind. And so that's what I did. I took a lot of time to think about it. I did a lot of research. And I was trying to be is this it? Do I need to become pro-choice now? And in doing a lot of research, I found some ways that pro-life people have tried to respond to this argument. And some of them are really, quite frankly, bad. They are not good ways of responding to this argument. They don't actually work. And I want to talk you through what some of those are, because pro-life people do make bad arguments. And here's some of them. So the first one is called the organ use objection. This is the idea that your kidney was designed for you. And so the violinist has no right to be using your kidney. But for whom was the womb created? The uterus was designed for a baby. Right? The organ use objection holds that because the uterus was designed to gestate unborn humans, therefore unborn humans have a right to the use of the mother's uterus in a way that the violinist does not have a right to the use of your kidney. There's a couple pretty big reasons why this argument doesn't work. The first one is that the organ use objection assumes that human bodies and all of their parts were designed with purpose. Now, I happen to believe that, but many Americans don't. I am willing to guess that most pro-choice people in the United States explicitly deny that our body parts were designed with any specific purpose. To them, it's extremely convenient that our eyes evolved to see, but they don't think that they were literally designed to see. And so this is not going to be convincing to pro-choice people. And that's without getting into the question of whether or not, let's face it, this is an implicitly religious position, right? And should an implicitly religious position then become the foundation for not only what we think people ought to do, but what people who don't believe in God should then get legally punished for either doing or not doing? We don't live in a theocracy. We all know this. But there is an even bigger reason why the organ use objection doesn't work. Let's assume the premises of the organ use objection for the sake of argument, all right? A person has an inherent right to use another's body part that was designed to be used by them, and refusing that use should be illegal. That's what the argument is claiming. And this is how it justifies the claim that the unborn human has a right to using the uterus because it was designed to be used by them. Well, if we assume this same religious worldview, we assume that is true, then those same people would say that the uterus is not the only female body part that was designed to be used by someone else. Under this exact same religious worldview, they would say that the purpose of the vagina is to be entered by a man as part of having sex, specifically within marriage in this view, right? So, if it is true that a person has an inherent right to use another's body part that was designed to be used by them, and refusing that use should be illegal, then I cannot see a way, according to this argument, that it would ever be okay for a woman to say no to having sex with her husband. As a matter of fact, by this argument, it would have to be illegal for a wife to ever say no to having sex with her husband. In the same way this argument claims it has to be illegal for a woman to say no to the fetus using her uterus. To put it bluntly, you cannot accept the organ use objection and also oppose marital rape. So this, not gonna work. The organ use objection is clearly false. Here's another one. Parent versus stranger. This is the idea that the violinist is a stranger. And so he has no right to be using your kidney, but the unborn child is exactly that. It is your child. And you have different obligations to your own children than you do to strangers. I do think there's some legitimacy to that. I do think parents have different obligations to their own children than they do to strangers. That is true. But a thoughtful pro-choice person is just going to change the thought experiment on you. Okay, doctor comes running in the room. He explains the whole situation. And then he says, by the way, we ran a DNA test on you while you were asleep because we were trying to figure out why you, of all people, were such a perfect match for the violinist. And you're never going to guess what we found. Congratulations. The violinist is actually your long-lost son. You are reunited at last. Now can you unplug? I still think you can unplug. I think you're a worse person if you unplug now. Maybe some people would say it's a sin if you unplug. But I don't think that the government can chain you to the bed and force you to stay plugged in to your long-lost violinist son for 9 months. And so you see how this does not fix our problem, at all. Let's talk about some more effective ways to respond to the violinist. So the first one is called the responsibility objection. This is the idea that when you engage in consensual sex, you are willingly engaging in an action which you know might result in the creation of an inherently needy child. And therefore you owe that child some sort of compensation, minimally not to kill them. Imagine for a second that we have this giant vending machine. Kind of looks like one of those Coke soda machines. There's a big red button in the middle. And when you push that button, you get a pleasurable experience. And sometimes a newborn baby pops out of the chute at the bottom. Are you tracking with me? I just super simplified pregnancy. All right? You push button, you get pleasurable experience. Sometimes newborn baby pops out of the chute at the bottom. We could even imagine that there's multiple buttons on this machine that correspond to different kinds of birth control. So maybe there's different buttons that give you a different level of a pleasurable experience and a different % chance that a newborn baby will pop out of the chute at the bottom. So let's say there's somebody, let's say it was me. I walk up to this machine and I really want to have that pleasurable experience. But I really do not want a newborn baby to pop out of the chute at the bottom. So I kind of analyze my options here. I pick whichever button corresponds to the level of risk I'm willing to take, and I push it. I get my pleasurable experience, and lo and behold, it is not my lucky day because a newborn baby does pop out of the chute at the bottom. It seems really obvious to me that I can't just leave that newborn there to die. Why, though? It's because I pushed the button, right? I willingly engaged in an action which I knew might result in the creation of an inherently needy child. And now I owe that child some sort of compensation. I think I have two options. I could either take that child out of the chute and care for it for 18 years, which is a very expensive, big time commitment, but I can do that. And I care a lot about making sure that every family, every woman, every dad, every family in the United States has the resources available where that is an actual viable option for them if that's what they want to do. They have the support that it would take to be able to do that. So if that is what they want, they've got the support there available to them. Or I could minimally provide that child with food and shelter until I can transfer that care to someone else. Essentially, I could do the equivalent of a safe haven law. Every state in the US has a safe haven law. This is a law where you can leave a newborn at any police station, fire station, or hospital for up to 30 days, in some states it's 60 days or 90 days after birth. No questions asked. You literally can just show up at a fire station and be like, have this newborn, and they will take the newborn. You cannot be prosecuted, they cannot ask you for any information, they cannot take your name, they cannot do literally anything. You have a right to hand over a newborn. I'm really sad that that law has to exist. Like, as I said, I care a lot about making sure that every person in the US has the resources they need, so they never feel like that is their only option. But I'm glad the law is there as a safety net. I want people to know that we will take that child and help them. And by the way, that child does not go into the foster care system. What happens to that child is they instantly go into the newborn adoption system, where there are currently about 1 million more families looking to adopt a newborn than there are newborns up for adoption. So that newborn is placed for adoption instantly. They never go into foster care. And I care a lot about that too, because our foster care system has a lot of issues. But that is not a thing that would happen to this newborn. I think I hypothetically have both of those options. I can take care of this child myself, or I can transfer that care to someone else, just minimally providing food and shelter until that transfer can take place. What I can't do is leave that newborn there to die. And that is very, very similar to pregnancy, because in 99.9% cases of pregnancy, you did willingly engage in an action which you knew might result in the creation of an inherently needy child. And now I think you minimally need to provide food and shelter until you can transfer that care to someone else who can. The responsibility objection is very powerful. Michael Tooley, he's one of the most famous pro-choice philosophers in the world, he admitted in a debate, you can watch it on YouTube if you want, it's pretty fun, that he never uses bodily autonomy arguments. He has given up on using this entire category of most popular, smartest pro-choice arguments because he believes that the responsibility objection crushes the violinist story. Because in the violinist story, you did not willingly engage in an action which you knew might result in the creation of an inherently needy violinist. That did not happen. But in 99.9% of cases of pregnancy, you did. You did willingly engage in that action. And now you minimally need to provide that child with compensation. The responsibility objection is very powerful. But as I am sure you have already noticed, it does not cover all cases of pregnancy. So is it possible that you could have the legal right to refuse when you didn't consent to getting into this situation in the first place? Is it possible you have the legal right to refuse in the case of rape? Now, in order to talk about this, I use a response that I call the obligation to not kill people approach. This is very different from all of the other pro-life arguments we've talked about so far, the good ones and the bad ones, because all of those argue for an obligation to help. Like, the organ use objection was arguing you have an obligation to help because the fetus has a right to the use of your uterus. Parent versus stranger was arguing you have an obligation to help because this is your own child. Responsibility objection was arguing you have an obligation to help because you got into this situation in the first place. I am not making that argument anymore. I am not arguing for an obligation to help others. I am arguing for the very modest claim that you never have a right to intentionally kill innocent humans. Because ultimately, the problem with abortion is not that the baby is entitled to help and someone's refusing to give that help. That's not the problem. The problem is that they're killing the baby. I don't really want to think about what happens in abortion procedures. It is not comfortable. But in this case, like philosophically, the details do actually matter. This is not going to be graphic, but this is just literally a scientific explanation of what happens in abortion procedures. In the earliest stages of pregnancy, the woman ingests a drug to separate the embryo from the placenta, which is how he gets his oxygen. After he suffocates, she takes a second pill to cause cramping in the uterus to expel the now dead embryo. Once the embryo is too big for the woman to safely have a chemical abortion, the abortion practitioner uses suction or forceps to dismember the fetus. If the fetus is too big for a dismemberment abortion, he's either given a shot of digoxin to stop his heart, or the umbilical cord is cut and the baby bleeds to death. The woman still has to give birth, just to a dead baby. If someone killed a toddler by any of those methods, by suffocation, lethal injection, dismemberment, or making him bleed to death, no one would claim that you were just refusing to help the toddler. Like, those are all lethal actions against a helpless, innocent person. Because once you're pregnant, you only have two options. You can either help by carrying that pregnancy to term, or you can have the baby killed in an abortion. There is no "I just refuse to help" option. It literally doesn't exist. And this is weird, because in most other scenarios, you do actually have three options. Like, let's say, for example, that Megan was dying of kidney failure. I was the only person in the whole world who was capable of donating my kidney to Megan. I think I hypothetically have all three of those options. I could help Megan, which would be me donating my kidney to Megan. Megan wouldn't die. Yay, I'm like a good person. I helped her out. It's great. I could not help Megan, which would be me refusing to donate my kidney to Megan. Megan would die. Very sad. Maybe I'm a bad person now, but like, I shouldn't be legally in trouble for that. Or hypothetically, I could kill Megan. I could just like come at her right now with a gun, eliminate her need for my kidney. It would save me a lot of embarrassment from having said no to her. Hypothetically, I can kill Megan. We all know that should not be a legal option on the table for me. And so that leaves me with two legal options, help or not help. But the problem is, not all three of these options even exist from the get-go in every scenario. Like, let's imagine for a second that Megan gets herself a giant yacht. Okay, this is way more fun. Megan doesn't have to die in this one, okay? Let's say that Megan wins the lottery, she gets herself a giant yacht, and as one does, if you're the new owner of a giant yacht, she takes it out one weekend all by herself. Saturday afternoon, she's just gonna like have a chill day on her yacht, and it's amazing, okay? So she takes it out into the middle of the ocean on her Saturday afternoon, and as she is out there, she discovers that there is a preschooler on her yacht. Like, this preschooler had been playing hide and go seek on the docks with his siblings, and he crawled onto a stranger's boat and hid in the closet and promptly fell asleep. I have totally babysat preschoolers before that would do this. All right, so Megan's in the middle of the ocean, discovers there's a preschooler on her yacht. I think Megan only has two options. I think Megan can either help that preschooler by allowing the preschooler to exist peacefully on her boat. She was already taking the boat back to shore later anyway, so she takes the boat back to shore exactly as planned, allows the toddler to get off of the yacht, and she calls the police and is like, there's a preschooler here, could you please come get the preschooler? And then the police come get the preschooler, and they go deal with it, and they get the preschooler back to his parents. Megan can just like wash her hands of the whole thing, okay? She could do that. Or, hypothetically, Megan could throw the preschooler overboard. She could kill the preschooler. There is no "I just refuse to help the preschooler" option. Like, it doesn't exist. If it did, that would be the equivalent of Megan like Star Trek beaming this preschooler off of her boat and onto shore, so she doesn't have to deal with the preschooler anymore, and the preschooler is fine. If we had Star Trek beaming technology, that would be awesome for so many reasons, but we don't. And so I think Megan only has two options, help or kill. And I think that killing is always wrong, except in weird cases like self-defense. And so that means that Megan is essentially obligated to help. Now, I wouldn't normally require someone to tolerate a strange preschooler on their boat. I am only going to require that for as long as it takes for her to get the boat back to shore safely, because there is no other nonviolent option. And I think the same is true in pregnancy. Because in pregnancy, there is no "I just refuse to help" option. If it did exist, that would be like if we had Star Trek beaming technology to Star Trek beam the fetus out of the mother's womb and into an artificial womb, so she doesn't have to be pregnant anymore and the fetus would be fine. If we had that, that would be awesome, but we don't. And so I wouldn't normally require someone to make that kind of physical sacrifice. I wouldn't even require someone to donate a pint of blood. But in this case, the only alternative to helping is intentionally killing an innocent person. Like, hypothetically, if my only two options were to either donate a pint of blood to a healthy but vulnerable person or kill that healthy but vulnerable person. If there actually was no I just refuse to help option, and it came down to help or kill, then I think you're obligated to donate that blood. It's not because I think people are generally obligated to help, though. It's because you may not kill innocent human beings. Now, sometimes this feels unfair to the pro-choice people I talk to, because in the violinist story, you have this easy out. You can just unplug. Like, it's so simple. So let's change the violinist story to make it more like pregnancy. So there is no I just refuse to help option anymore. Let's say the doctor comes in and explains to you that if you unplug from the violinist while he is still alive, then this crazy kidney disease fluid is still flowing around in his body. And when you pull the tube out, some of that fluid is going to backflow into the tube and come into you. And now you have the crazy kidney disease, and you're going to die. But if the violinist is already dead, then you can safely unplug from him. The kidney disease fluid won't be moving around anymore, so it's not going to come into you and harm you at all. In other words, in order for you to safely unplug from the violinist, he must be already dead. There is a machete next to your bed. Can you hack the violinist to pieces in order to unplug from him? Yeah, I don't think so. Maybe some people would, but the violinist story loses a lot of its rhetorical force the moment it puts you in the position of someone who has to literally kill someone else instead of just refusing to help him. See, the obligation to not kill approach uncovers the very misleading nature of bodily rights arguments. They try to paint abortion as this mere withdrawing of support. But the unborn is not a terminally ill person that you are just withdrawing life support from. Abortion is killing. That's literally what is happening in the procedure. Now, some pro-choice people, including some pro-life people, think that chemical abortion, RU46, is morally justifiable because it is a less direct form of killing. It is true that it is a less direct form of killing, but that does not make it okay. If I killed Megan by hitting her with my fist over and over and over again, or I killed Megan by hitting her with a rock, the rock is less direct, but that doesn't make it okay. If I went scuba diving with Megan and I took off her oxygen tank, I stole it from her while we were at the ocean floor, that is less direct than if I killed her with a rock. But I don't get to try to say, I didn't kill her, the ocean did. I mean, yes, the ocean literally is what killed her, but you killed her, right? I took away her oxygen tank while she was at the ocean floor. I killed her. It doesn't ultimately matter whether it is a more or less direct form of killing when I still actually killed her. See, there's this other very misleading thing that's happening here, which is that in all of these arguments, a fetus is being treated like a sick person. Did you notice that? In every thought experiment I did, Megan was dying of kidney failure and she needed my kidney. The violinist is dying of this crazy disease and he needs to be hooked up to me. Every time it is someone that is dying. This is a very relevant distinction because when a healthy person winds up dead in a medical thought experiment, you can't claim that the surgeon just didn't save them. If at point A, you have a healthy person, and at point B, you have a dead person, and all that happens in between is a medical procedure, you can't claim that the surgeon just didn't save them. If at the beginning of the surgery someone's dying, and at the end they're dead, that might not be the surgeon's fault. It could be, it's just a lot less clear. But if at the beginning they're healthy and at the end they're dead, you can't claim the surgeon just didn't rescue them. See, the violinist story can claim that abortion isn't killing because you're not actually doing anything to the violinist. So when he dies, that isn't on you. He dies from the thing he was already dying of. You just refuse to rescue him from it. But abortion, you are taking a life that is perfectly healthy, just underdeveloped and vulnerable, and intentionally snuffing it out. Abortion is intentionally killing an innocent human. Now, some pro-choice people will say to me, okay, I get that the unborn isn't sick, But you did just admit that it's underdeveloped and vulnerable, and that's basically the same thing as being sick. No, it is not. Being underdeveloped and vulnerable is not the same thing as being sick. And I think we all know this intuitively. Like, an infant is too underdeveloped and vulnerable to swim. We all know this. Their lungs are too underdeveloped and vulnerable to survive. So if I walked over and took a 1-month-old baby out of its crib and went over and dropped it into a pool, I can't try to claim I didn't kill it, the pool did. Like, what I did is I took an underdeveloped and vulnerable human out of an environment in which they were growing, and I purposefully dropped them in an environment where I knew that they couldn't survive. That is killing. That is literally my whole point. I am not arguing that strong people always have an obligation to help innocent, vulnerable people. I am arguing that strong people always have an obligation to not kill innocent, vulnerable people. Last thing. Bodily autonomy cannot justify killing, but perhaps religious freedom can. It's the last piece that always comes up when I'm talking to pro-choice people. When they agree with me that bodily autonomy cannot justify this kind of thing, they'll be like, well, some people don't believe that the unborn are persons. There are certain religions that say that the unborn doesn't have any value, and you can't take away those people's right to their religious freedom. I believe that religious freedom is incredibly important, but religious freedom does not justify human rights violations. One of my absolute favorite places to go for good thinking on religious freedom is my friends at Secular Pro-Life. Because what I think about religion and what you think about religion is honestly completely irrelevant to the abortion debate. We don't live in a theocracy. So I love to talk to my atheist friends about how they think about religious freedom and abortion. And this is one of my favorite quotes from my friend Monica, who's the executive director over there. Freedom of religion is important, but it doesn't justify human rights violations, like ever. There are so many examples in human history of societies who believed that human newborns were not worthy of any sort of rights until after they had been named, or after they had been fed for the first time, or after they had been baptized, and it would be completely fine to kill them. If we had a society today, like in the United States, there was a culture that believed that it is okay to kill human infants up until the point when, say, that they're baptized. Would we say legally that that's okay? Would we make infanticide legal in this country? No, we would not. Because religious freedom is very important, but it does not justify human rights violations. It doesn't justify killing innocent humans. Now, that's just a hypothetical. We actually have a real, very real case of this that's happened in the United States with Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions. So, shout out to my friend Kelsey Hazard. She's an atheist attorney, and she was the founder of Secular Pro-Life. And she brought to my attention a series of court cases about Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions. So if you don't know what Jehovah's Witnesses believe, they believe a lot of different things, but one of the very important tenets of their religion is they are against blood transfusions. They are against having someone else's or another kind of blood coming into your body. They believe that it is extremely sinful. And so if there is an adult Jehovah's Witness who is dying and in need of a blood transfusion, they will refuse that blood transfusion and they will die. I think that is absolutely their right to do so. That is what they believe. That is their religious freedom to refuse the blood transfusion and die as a result. However, they do not have the right to make that decision about other people, particularly about minors. And there is a series of court cases about this. There have been a number of Jehovah's Witnesses children who have been very ill, on death's door, and desperately in need of a blood transfusion to save their life. And the parents of those children refuse the blood transfusion and say, no, you may not give my child a blood transfusion because that is sinful in our religion. Now, normally, parents have automatic medical power of attorney over their children. They have a complete right to make choices about what kinds of medical care their children gets, but not in this case. Every single time the US legal system steps in and says, you do not have the right to refuse life-saving care to your child. If that child has not yet reached the age of consent, where they can make decisions for themselves, and they have purposefully themselves decided, I am choosing to adhere to this religion as well, the parent does not have the right to basically condemn their child to death by refusing the blood transfusion on their behalf. And so every time the legal system has stepped in, there has been a court order that has given the hospital the permission, basically forced the hospital to give the blood transfusion to the child against the parents' wishes. Religious freedom is incredibly important. No one doubts the sincerity of that religious belief that the Jehovah's Witnesses have. I believe that they think this is sinful. I believe that's very important to them. I don't doubt the sincerity of that. But they don't have the right to push that belief onto innocent children who have not had the opportunity to consent to this happening to them. They do not have the right to condemn that child to death by refusing the blood transfusion. They can refuse a blood transfusion for themselves as an adult, but they cannot on behalf of their child. Religious freedom is incredibly important, but it does not justify killing innocent humans. Honestly, no one's religious beliefs, I don't care whether they're mine or yours or anyone else's, no one's religious beliefs get to justify killing innocent humans, period. Now, there are emotionally understandable reasons to frame abortion as something other than killing, as something other than violence against innocent people. That means having to acknowledge that millions of men and women have participated in killing. And that's a really, really difficult pill to swallow. I understand why that's emotionally hard and why it's much easier to frame abortion as just refusing to help someone. But I don't think that it's helpful to paint abortion as something other than what it is. I think the only way that we're going to end abortion is to acknowledge what it is and to get the men and women who have participated in it the healing that they need.